Some men are homeless, some men are great warriors. Our hero today falls somewhere in there. He is a cunning, mysterious, and sometimes frightful character with an intriguing and bizarre history. Hello, I'm Brian Longshanks and I am going to take you on a journey. Strap in and buckle up for the first book in a long series of the Garth Brown Mysteries. The Garth Brown Mystery, XD/TK Azu 5. Detective Garth Brown was making his daily rounds inspecting all the local shops. This was something he found pride in. He had a favorite shop for every time of the day and all the locals knew it. In the morning he would stop by Keith's Eggs Incorporated for breakfast, where he would have a muffin and 2 evenly cut sausages. The owner of Keith's Eggs Incorporated was Dr. Keith Longshanks. For brunch, Garth would pay a visit to Sally's Celery for a glass of eggnog and a pickle salad with gravy. This was his good for him. For luncheon, Detective Garth Brown would fancy himself with something awfully dreadful. Later in the day, when he was feeling snackish, he would visit the Prancing Dragon for a pint of marmalade brew and a tub of cabbage. One Wednesday afternoon he was astonished to find a new shop had replaced the old chapel. Over the door there was a massive sign showing a blond man with spectacles and a teethy smile which said, "Welcome to Cuppins Tuppins, where we bring the dainties to you." Garth loved Cuppins as a child, but he knew Cuppins had a dark side. He was immediately suspicious of this new fellow in the neighborhood and decided to approach the facility. The detective sat down a small round table at the front of the shop and cried out, "Garth here. I will have your best tuppence," said Garth, loosening his suspenders that were drenched. Mr. Cuppins smiled and said, "You won't be needing those anymore. Not in my shop." As the store owner spoke these words he grinned and looked towards the window. "Why is this, you say?" replied Garth in his heavy British accent. "Oh, I apologize for the silly remark. However, my tuppence will keep you in your seat and you will never want to leave." Again he smiled and looked at the window a second time. Garth inquired, "What is with the window? Are you waiting for someone?" Cuppins replied, "I am waiting for Cindy Winters. She is late for her shift." Before he could finish, Garth interrupted him by saying, "I am a detective. Just get me my tuppence and I will find her." By the window whispered a child that was sitting alone in the corner of the shop. "Thank you, boy," said Garth as he tightened his suspenders, grabbed his hat and walked out the door on his way to search for the missing girl. Chapter 2, Lost Girl Forgotten at Midnight in London Town. "Cindy!" shouted Garth, walking down the street. He knew that if he didn't find her within the next 24 hours then she was certainly dead. Garth had worked one case before this one and he was never able to solve it. Not even close to finding one clue. It was a real tonk. This case caused him to have severe facial deformities. He had read on the internet that it was important to visit a shrink named Oyster and get his nose reversed to strengthen brain activity to help him solve the case. It didn't, and now Garth Brown had a reversed nose, long straight black hair and no teeth. He was about 7 feet tall and could never buy shoes that fit, so he made his own out of leather and metal scraps. Garth liked to eat tuppence because he didn't have to chew. He could just suck it in. The detective also had a dark sense of humor which caused him troubles with his wife and her 13 brothers. Garth was a lonely child and was adopted into his wife's family after his parents were murdered in Florence. This quasi-incestuous bond caused problems in their marriage and ended in sardine, his wife, leaving him for Dr. Keith. "Over here!" shouted a small clown. Garth walked over to the clown and was horrified to see the remains of a girl. The body disabled. He knew immediately this was not Cindy. but a mangy old whore with a jimply leg, and kept on with his search. Garth Brown continued walking the streets for several days without sleep. He now knew that Cindy was indeed murdered and most likely dissolved. Possibly even kicked. He then decided he had best return to Cuppins Tuppins to inform him of this update. Garth here," he announced as he meticulously approached the door. He soon found the door had been kicked in and poor Cuppins was on the floor in a shatter. Garth continued. Cindy won't be here for her shift. She won't be here at all." Cuppins didn't respond. Cuppins Garth, confused by Cuppins' unresponsiveness, left and continued on with his search for the missing girl. The detective was very confused as to why the shop had been broken into. Could it possibly be Cindy's killer now trying to get Cuppins, he thought to himself. Instantly he shook this thought off. If the killer wanted Cuppins dead, Cuppins would be dead. Wouldn't he? Or would we? Garth thought harder, but it was now midnight and Cindy was all but a forgotten girl in London. Chapter 3, Cindy Found. Cuppins woke in a frenzy, forgetting himself for a moment before remembering he had been brutally assaulted by a masked villain. He called the sheriff and said, "I have been attacked, but I do not know who or why." He now started shaking in fear. "Calm down, Master Cuppins, and tell me what happened," replied Sheriff Gooch. "I don't remember what happened, but I just woke up and the door was kicked in, the windows shattered and my head hurting." "You probably just drank one too many tuppence last night. I will send Detective Garth Brown. He is my best man. Now goodbye, Cuppins," said Gooch. Cuppins hung up the phone and looked into the cracked mirror of his bathroom. Cuppins was a handsome young lad of 37 years with crooked teeth, curly light sandy brown hair, and smile that would light up a Christmas tree. He was well fancied in all of London, especially for his tuppence. Just then a loud bang shook his world. It was thunder, for it was midsummer in London. Cuppins was afraid of thunder, but he knew Garth Brown wasn't, so he phoned him. "Hello, detective. This is Cuppins." "Cuppins, I will be there shortly, but first I must meet with my supervisors. They are both wise and powerful and will know exactly what I should do." Garth arrived at the House of Lords, the local detective shop for gadgets. He was greeted by his superior officer, Frizzy Longbottom. Frizzy was a short, plump fellow of good ilk. He had sturdy facial features but a horrendous cranial lobe. His earlobes were also fascinating and fluttered about as he moved his head to and fro. Garth shook Frizzy's hand and spoke softly into his ear in the language that only they could understand. "BA3-7?" questioned Garth. "Quite right," giggled Frizzy, "now we must smile and quiver softly." Both men smiled strangely and quivered with the beat of the wind. "Izonga 782," shouted Garth. "You know what to do," responded Frizzy. Just then Detective Garth Brown ran to his ugly 2002 automobile and darted towards the river, for this was where the detectives had their nightly rituals. All of the master detectives would be here tonight. Garth waited patiently beneath the willow tree, smoking his pipe and humming songs while the sun set and the moon lit the night sky. Just then Garth heard a skin-curdling cry. He froze in his spot. Was it the killer? Was it Cuppins? Were the master detectives pranking him? Both options unlikely. Garth reached into his trench coat and pulled out his nifty rape whistle. He blew it 3 times. No response. Garth then heard footsteps walking closer towards him. He tried to turn the flashlight on his phone on, but his battery had died. He could feel his hands shaking as the footsteps grew closer. Garth blew his whistle again. "I've been waiting for you," the dark figure said. Continuing, "Shh, come closer." Garth, not knowing what else to do, blew his whistle so hard that it flew from his hand. "Who are you? Some wild thing?" Garth questioned. "I am your light, your source of wisdom, and my name is Foster Spanks." "So it is you of whom Frizzy has so often spoken." Garth was fearful, but excited. He had wanted this for so long. "It is I. I am the chief of police. I have become concerned with your lack of solved cases. If you solve this missing persons case of Cindy Winters, all will be forgiven. Garth Brown became incredibly frazzled. He knew if he couldn't impress this man that he would never be recommended for a promotion to wizard-level detective. "What must I do?" Garth said while trying to maintain composure. "You must find Cindy Winters," Foster replied while disappearing into the darkness like a questionable wildebeest. Chapter 4, Case Solved. I knew I had to provide the department with evidence of Cindy's murder, but I had a theory. The old whore on the street was not indeed the old whore but rather the body of Cindy, beaten so horribly that even the sharpest of detectives would be mistaken. I knew I must take this body into the department and close this case once and for all. I grabbed my briefcase, put on my trench coat and detective cap and headed for the door of my musty-smelling apartment. Just as I reached the door, a hand grabbed my shoulder and pulled me down to the ground. It was Cuppins. "My God, Cuppins!" I shouted, "How did you get in here?" "Shh," Cuppins whispered, "they are watching us." "Who, Cuppins?" I insisted. "Who is watching us?" "Philostrato and his band of misfits. They want my Tuppence recipe." "Be damned if I don't," I yelled. Could it be possible that these men killed Cindy in search for the recipe? "That is what I feel too," replied Cuppins. "Bogglery. I have already found the body and have solved this case. Come see," I said as I grabbed Cuppins by the hand and led him towards the body near the clown. "This is not Cindy," said Cuppins as we reached the murdered body. "Think of it, Cuppins," I said as I pulled out my favorite gadget. "This body was battered beyond belief, but this gadget will create what she looked like prior to the injuries." I pressed the button, the gadget, and aimed it towards the body. Just then a bullet whistled by Cuppins' head. "Philostrato has found us," shouted Cuppins. "Quick, follow me," I shouted as I grabbed the dead body. I knew I had no time to wait for the results from my gadget. I must take this dead body back to headquarters and get my wizard-level status. I grabbed the bloody body and put it on the back of Cuppins. We raced toward my ugly 2002 automobile while bullets whizzed past both myself and Cuppins. We used the body for armor. I was impressed with Cuppins' bravery. We reached my car, Cuppins threw the body into the back seat of my automobile and we raced towards Frizzy's temple. I knew we would be safe here. Chapter 5, Frizzy's Demise. While driving with Mr. Cuppins to see Frizzy about the case, Garth could not help but wonder what was going on. He realized that ever since he was a small boy, he couldn't seem to make sense of the world. It seemed a dark and shabby place where odd things always happened to him, and he just wanted this one reward. Wizard-level detective. Once they arrived, Cuppins unloaded the body on the lawn and confessed to Garth that he was squeamish but reassured by Garth's presence. "That's nice. Can you please tell me where you were at the time of Cindy's death?" Garth questioned Cuppins. "When did she die?" Cuppins retorted. "In September," Garth replied. "I was in my shop all month. I was preparing my Tuppence recipe," Cuppins said. Garth was totally satisfied with this. He really loved Cuppins' Tuppence. Just then, Frizzy came out in his robe and loudly pronounced he had finally been promoted to Wizard Chief of Operations. "Here is the body of Cindy Winters. She was brutally murdered by a homeless man named Stinky Mike on September the 9th, 1589, and I have solved my first case." Good job. "I'll take the body from here," Frizzy insisted. "Now go home and have some Tuppence on me. Your wizard ceremony will be performed on the 4th day. Garth smiled all the way home while Cuppins talked at length about his discovery of the Tuppence recipe and all the troubles he had had with Philostrato and his band of misfits. "May I stop and have a poop at the next station?" asked Cuppins. "Indeed you certainly may. We are celebrating tonight, Cuppins," said Garth. Garth pulled over at the next station and let Cuppins out. As Garth sat in his car waiting for Cuppins, he noticed Cuppins had left his wallet in the vehicle. Being a snoop, Garth desired to see if Cuppins had any coupons. As Garth opened the wallet, a small brown note fell from the wallet. Detective Garth put on his spectacles and opened the paper. The paper read: Tuppence recipe. 3 teaspoons of sugar. 4 milligrams of wine, red or white with blossoms. 1 potato and cheese batter. 1 pig's foot. 90 marshmallows. 5 grams of brown rice. 1 tablespoon of peanut butter. Snake sperm, as much as possible. 70 ounces of salt. Signed. C.W. August. Garth frantically stroked his eyebrows and thought to himself, I could have sworn Cuppins said he himself was making the recipe in September. Signed C.W. What could that mean? I suppose I never have learnt Cuppins' last name. Chapter 6. I was startled by the sound of my phone ringing early in the morning. I picked up my phone and was alarmed to hear Frizzy's voice on the other end. Garth, I ran tests on the body. That is not Cindy Winters. That is a whore. This case is still open. I am giving you one last chance to solve it or you are fired. I immediately felt the need for a good tuppence and to let my good friend Cuppins know that I had not solved the case after all. As I arrived I was shocked to see that the shop had sold and Cuppins was nowhere to be seen. I went in and spoke to the new owner, Detective Garth here. What happened to Cuppins' tuppence? Oh, Cuppins Gausley had to go tend to his dying grandmother in the countryside, said the gorgeous shop owner. I wanted to kiss her but I refrained out of questionable gayness. But that is for another story. What a shame. I liked Cuppins. G. Gausley? I asked. Yes, detective, I have the bill of sales right here. I grabbed the paper and smelled it. I was deeply perturbed. If Cuppins' last name was Gausley, then why was C.W. on the recipe? Why was it signed in August if he allegedly spent all of September creating this recipe? Thus, I began my quest to seek down and bring Cuppins to justice. I knew then that he, not Stinky Mike, was my lead suspect. I took a poop and went forth. Thank you for joining me on the beginning of Garth Brown's series of fortune and misfortune. I hope you will join me again next time for part 2 of this original trilogy. Again, I'm Brian Longshanks and you have been listening to The Garth Brown Mysteries.